What of the whistleblower? What makes a company employee decide that enough is enough? And what are the ramifications when they do? In 2003, Katharine Gun was a young linguist and analyst, fluent in Mandarin, at the government's communication headquarters, GCHQ in Cheltenham. It was a busy time. The United States and its allies were rattling sabres in the direction of Iraq, in spite of the reluctance of the United Nations to lend its support. Communications were flowing in and out of Cheltenham thick and fast, but one, which flashed onto Katharine's screen, was to end up not on the desks of MI6 and the NSA, but at the Observer newspaper. Katharine's decision to send it there not only cost her her career, but also her friends, her livelihood, and very nearly the best years of her life. Yesterday she called into our Gloucester studios, and I started by asking her how it all started.
An email came through on my computer, which had been forwarded down from a more senior manager, down through to the linguists and analysts across the various sections, which was from NSA, which is the American equivalent of GCHQ, asking for our assistance in spying on the 6 countries that were sitting on the UN Security Council at the time. They were the 6 swing nations, in order to get information on the diplomats so that the US could then use that information against them to possibly bully them into voting yes on the second resolution, which would authorize an invasion of Iraq.
That must have been a startling moment for you to see that email. What did you make of it?
First of all, I was shocked by the request because I felt it was illegal, but also I was just horrified by what was being suggested, that the democracy of the UN was going to be undermined by this really underhand manner in order to gain authorization for what was essentially a preemptive war. And I thought, well, if this information was in the public domain, it might generate so much shock and horror that it might put the Iraq war on a much slower pace and possibly even derail it altogether.
I suppose bosses at GCHQ might think that the job of GCHQ is not to admit that sort of material to the public domain. And I'm sure, as an intelligence officer, somebody working in that community, and as someone signed up to the Official Secrets Act, it must have not been a decision you took lightly to hand that information on.
Absolutely. When you join any organisation like that, you sign the Official Secrets Act. And of course, in the beginning, I was perhaps a little bit naive, but the thing is, I suppose anybody joining those sorts of organisations agree that they believe that their government would be behaving honourably and that you wouldn't be asked to do something which would jeopardise and put lives potentially at risk. And that's how I felt when I joined GCHQ, that I felt that, you know, I would be working for the national interest, but not in order to create war.
So what did you do?
Very simply, I printed off a copy of the email and put it in the post to somebody I knew who knew a journalist, and it made its way through to the Observer.
Did you think you would be able to do that without any comeback, or would you do that consciously thinking that it might jeopardise your own interests?
It was very nerve-wracking. I did it in a very sort of surreptitious manner. I was hoping that because I did it anonymously, that would be sufficient to kind of maintain my anonymity.
Had it been a decision you took some time over, or was it one of those decisive moments when you think, I know what I must do?
I guess you could call it a decisive moment. I mean, I read the email on a Friday, and then the following Monday, after dwelling on it over the weekend, I went back into work, and that's when I printed a copy of it off.
And how did the news break? I mean, it was the first you saw of it, the front of the Observer on that Sunday morning.
Yes, that's right.
How did you feel when you saw it?
Absolutely terrified, because I hadn't imagined that the email would have been replicated and printed in its entirety on the front pages.
And once they'd reproduced that document, did it mean that a finger was left pointing at you and your colleagues?
It meant a finger was pointing at certain people within GCHQ, yes.
So there must have been rather a tense staff meeting on Monday morning.
There was a manhunt. I guess around 100 people were being interviewed.
How did that make you feel?
Well, my initial reaction was to try and deny it and hopefully get away with it. But after my initial interview where I did deny it, I just felt so awful. I guess my guilty conscience was getting the better of me, and I couldn't bear the duplicity any longer. And on the following Wednesday, I had my interview on a Tuesday because they'd taken time to get round to me. And on the Wednesday, I went back into work and confided in my line manager.
How did your line manager react?
Well, I was distraught, and she was very consoling and considerate, and basically she was incredibly nice about it.
Did burly, thick-set men in raincoats turn up?
Well, no, I was at work at this point, so we went down to the security division at work, and I was interviewed by security officers, and in the meantime they'd called special branch, so a couple of officers were winging their way from London down to Cheltenham, so I pretty much told them everything.
You spilled the beans, as they say. And what happened next?
I was taken into Cheltenham police station, where they held me for just under 24 hours while they searched my house. And then the following morning, because by this time it was evening, so I had to stay in custody overnight, someone interviewed me, and then I was released on bail.
And you were charged with?
Charged with Section 1 of breaking the Official Secrets Act.
I mean, you must be... I'm thinking that the intelligence community is famously a very clannish bunch. I presume if you're living and working in GCHQ, you know, you must have lots of friends there. Were you, in that instant, all of a sudden removed from that?
Yes.
How did you cope with that?
It was very difficult. I mean, as soon as I walked out of my office, I never went back in again. I may have had some personal memorabilia on my desk, I don't know, possibly a mug. But, I mean, I never saw it again. I never got a bundle of "this is your stuff," but probably there wasn't much of it anyway. And then it was just like, you're out, that's it. You're end of that part of your life.
Were you able to talk to anyone at home or family or friends?
Stupidly, I don't know why, but I didn't confide in my parents straight away, and they lived abroad at the time, so it was only possibly a week later that they actually figured it out that it was me, because they'd been following the story online.
And so what did you do in this period while you were bailed and awaiting a hearing?
It was difficult. I wasn't working, and most of my circle of friends were from GCHQ, and of course they were at work during the day, and in the evenings it was kind of awkward because although I was friendly with some of them still, I didn't want to hang out with the whole bunch of people because other people were sort of shunning me. So, my whole environment sort of narrowed very rapidly, and I basically stayed at home a lot.
And did you feel like a pariah in some ways? And were you stricken with conscience or any regrets at what had happened?
No, I wasn't. I didn't sort of regret what I had done, but it was difficult for myself and my husband, and we'd only been married 6 months at this stage. So, it was putting a pressure on us financially and emotionally.
Was it in the public domain at this point? I mean, were you...
No, I was still anonymous. Yeah, I felt like really there was nobody I can talk to. It was very difficult, 8 months.
So it was 8 months before you actually went to court?
8 months before they charged me. I was arrested in March. They charged me in November. And by this time, I'd got legal representation. Liberty had made contact with me, and so we'd been working on possible scenarios. And when they did charge me, so we started building our defence. And one of the things we asked for was all the